Hi people, so it's half 1 a.m. I've just been reading the Times. I'm kind of multitasking. Have I've had lots of coffee, so I'm not tired. And of course, this weather. It's a warm night today. This is not what the video's about, but I'll just mention it in passing. 40 degrees in Lincolnshire. It's a UK record for England and the UK generally. And in the other home nations, all breaking records. So something to think about. My heart really goes out to those people who lost their homes in London today. That horrendous scenes. I can't imagine what that's like. I mean, we often gauge disaster by lives lost, but if someone's lost their home, that's a terrible thing. Okay, so tonight it's also hot in Westminster, as we know. It's now down to three candidates: Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt, and Liz Truss. Um, Kimmy Badenoch was knocked out earlier today, which was to be expected. But she had a strong campaign, and I think she will be a rising star. I hope she's in the next cabinet, and Tom Tugendhat as well. I think they're both very capable. Um, I've noticed I've been following the candidates on social media to kind of gauge, although I'm not a Tory member, to kind of gauge what the positions are, what they're coming out with. And a refreshing thing tonight, Penny Mordaunt has said that we've been too soft on China and we need to get tough. Um, this is good to hear. And it made me think of what are we looking for in a prime minister? What am I personally looking for in a prime minister? Now, as I've said a few times, we don't directly elect prime ministers in this country. Nevertheless, the prime minister is really the figurehead of the government. They're the head of the government, and they're by definition arguably the most powerful person in the country. It's obviously a very powerful, very important role. They are essentially the face of the country on the world stage, and whether it be 1 year or 10 years, they're at the top. So it's very, very important. Um, to date, 54 men and one woman have, no, excuse me, 53 men and two women have occupied this role. Um, there's now a certain chance that I mean, there's a definitive outcome that our next prime minister, our 56th prime minister, will either be the first ethnic minority, Rishi Sunak, or the third woman, Penny Mordaunt or Liz Truss. These are my questions. So it's going to be historic in that sense. These are my questions. What I would ask of all three. Number one, in foreign policy, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, will they take a tough line with Russia and China? Now, this is very important. No leading British politician in the right mind isn't going to be tough with Putin right now, at least in terms of the narrative they're putting out. Johnson deserves credit for supporting Ukraine. Um, and Theresa May expelled Russian diplomats after Salisbury. So we have been getting consistently tougher with Russia. That's a good thing. But I think we still appease China. I'm not going to get into a big thing about Johnson's legacy. That's for another video. But Johnson flip-flopped on China. Um, and I really think that we need to recognize that Beijing is not a friend. You just need to look at the attitude of these so-called wolf warrior diplomats or thugs, basically. Not only has China torn up the Sino-British Joint Declaration, what they're doing to the Uyghurs is repugnant. Um, the general human rights thing is awful, but that can be said in many countries. Rather, the real issue is that this is a rising superpower, and they, I believe, have malicious intent. If we look at the warnings that MI5 have issued, I think any practical prime minister needs to take that seriously. So, taking a tough line with Russia and China is extremely important. I want to see a prime minister with the courage, because it does take courage, to basically stand up to Putin and Xi. Putin, that's fine. The last few prime ministers have, but also Xi Jinping. It's not good enough to go 50%. We have to stand up to both these regimes. We must not be pushed around by them. And this covers a lot of areas. I read in the Times that Vivian Stern, who's the new head of UK Universities International, which is kind of a collective body, she's talking about, well, to me it reads as China appeasement. Basically, oh, we need to not step away from the globalization of universities. And she warned of the disaster of deteriorating relations akin to what happened with Russia. But less reliance on China is a good thing. There's too much down reliance on China. And I feel that our education sector has for too long basically pandered to Beijing. Too damn long. And I seriously would question universities on this regard. I think the government should threaten to withhold funding. The education department should withhold funding to universities that don't prove that they're taking the China threat seriously. And there's a lot of components to that, probably for a video in its own right. But in foreign policy, this is critical. Of course, it's not just about that. It's also about building ever stronger relations with like-minded democracies. But of course, we can't conduct foreign policy just by getting on well with Canada and Australia and the United States, and like-minded democracies. I think post-Brexit, we need to improve relations with our European neighbours and friends. They have been strained in the Johnson era, and I'm not solely blaming Boris Johnson for that. I think Macron is partly to blame as well. But it's critical that we have good relations with our neighbours in Ireland and the Netherlands and France, Germany. Critical. I think we need to be forward looking in the world. I want to see a Prime Minister who, of course, is unapologetically patriotic, but who also doesn't look inwards, looks outwards, and wants his country to have a major role in the world, and who has a progressive worldview, by which I mean a worldview that is standing up for human rights, for democracy, all those things, but supports growing democracies as well. Obviously, we can't just work with Western liberal democracies. We have to reach out, and this is not a simple thing. But we need a prime minister with the courage to do that, with an outward vision. Um, Very important. Um, there's a lot of other factors around that, but that's a big one. Um, I want to see a prime minister, domestically speaking, that will seriously look at bridging the gap between public trust and our institutions. Because right now, in my opinion, it's huge. Of course, I'm going to get on my horse here and talk about one of the main things that concerns me, which is crime and justice. I believe there is a massive, massive public disconnect between, for example, bodies like the Sentencing Council and the Parole Board and public opinion. Um, I'm not saying it's the domain of the Prime Minister alone to deal with this. It's obviously the Home Secretary, the Justice Secretary as well. But I want to see a Prime Minister that recognises this problem, and it's not just more of the same. I mean, we have had successive Justice Secretaries talking tough. Some have been better than others. I'd say Dominic Raab has been one of the better ones. But all we ever see is trickle down change. I think we need radical change, actually. And I think the Sentencing Council and the Parole Board need a serious shake-up. I think they need to be pressured to really, really understand public anger and public concerns about this. There's a lot of other areas as well. The police, certainly. I think there is a breakdown in trust. There's a lot of other areas, but this is extremely important because if this mistrust continues, I think we're going to see unrest. I really do. So a prime minister needs to really, really address that. And hell, that does mean a degree of populism. But you know what they say, one man's populism is another man's listening to the people. Or one woman's populism is another woman's listening to the people, as it may be. Um, Three, I want to see a prime minister who will absolutely not waver in defending the United Kingdom internally. What I mean by that is who will staunchly oppose any attempts to break us up. Of course, I'm thinking of Scottish nationalism, but any attempts, the four nations need to stay together. Prime Minister of the United Kingdom needs to believe in the United Kingdom and, courageously and energetically defend. the United Kingdom. Certainly, they should oppose Scottish independence and any attempt at a referendum for at least a generation, because that's what the 2014 referendum was supposed to be. They should remind Sturgeon that she agreed to those terms in 2014, um, and that the Scottish people decided. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has to not be afraid to support the United Kingdom. Seems like a no-brainer to me. And lastly, the other big thing I'm looking for is they need to really consider ethics in public life and clean politics. A while back, this wouldn't have been something I really thought about, but honestly, the Johnson era has been quite sleazy. Boris Johnson is a proven liar. I give him credit for Ukraine, I give him credit for other areas. Um, but the truth of the matter is, he is connected to sleaze and dishonesty. That's a problem. And I think a lot of his supporters, including some of those running right now, they haven't really recognized this. Liz Truss, I don't know if she's fully recognized it. There is real public anger at this perception of one rule for them, another rule for us. So whoever wins needs to address that. Do they recognize that the public are infuriated by the perception of double standards? So they need to seriously clean up politics. Um, if that means bringing fresh faces into the cabinet, that's important. Usually a new prime minister does that anyway, but I think it's very important. That's why I think Kimmy Badenoch and Tom Tugendhat would be good additions to a cabinet. Um, because neither, especially Tugendhat, are not kind of tainted by the Johnson legacy. Um, and that's it really. Of course, there's many, many other important issues. Too many to name here. Way too many to name here. But tonight, those are the things I'm thinking of. I imagine there'll be a lot of activity in Westminster tonight. I wonder how much sleep they'll get. I imagine the big thing will be between Truss and Mordaunt over who gets Badenoch supporters. But then again, Rishi Sunak can't be complacent because he doesn't have overwhelming support from what I can tell among members. So I saw a report earlier that he risks being the new Ken Clark. In 2001, I believe it was 2001, Ken Clark was doing well in the parliamentary level, but he lost. Of course, that year, William Hague, actually, excuse me, Ian Duncan Smith ended up as leader, the quiet man. So Sunak shouldn't be complacent. I mean, he is leading in parliamentary support, but he still hasn't made the 120 threshold. Things could be interesting tomorrow. It could actually end up being the two women, Mordaunt versus Truss. Of the two of them, I honestly don't know. I am impressed by Mordaunt's statement tonight about standing up to China. That's very important. And I think Liz Truss has been a strong foreign secretary. So I actually think both will be strong on national security. I don't have major concerns about either of them. Rishi Sunak, I'm not so sure about. He's said the right things about Russia, but I do question his stance on China. I do question if he's got a resolve on China. He just seems way too cautious. That's a big problem. Um, I think he's been an okay chancellor. I think he took robust action during the pandemic. And remember, a year ago he was the most popular politician in the country. But Sunak needs to prove that he will be tough on China, and so far he hasn't done so. Um, I just think he's too cautious. Anyway, those are the things I'm thinking of. Of course, there's many other issues. Domestically speaking, I didn't mention that I spoke about rebuilding trust. Compassion, very, very important. Many people believe the Tories don't have compassion in their DNA. And I admit for a long time, I have felt that the Tories were a party for the rich. So I want to see these people, speak out against the big energy companies. I want them to prove that they will consider the most vulnerable in society. Um, and they will basically shake off the image of the nasty party, as Theresa May famously said. Um, one thing about Truss and Mordaunt is they both kind of echo Thatcher. That's not entirely a good thing. Yes, Thatcher was a strong prime minister. Yes, she was in office for 11 years, but she was also a very divisive and polarizing figure. So, Truss and Mordaunt need to understand that it is precisely factorism that lost Tory votes in the North, so they'd be foolish to take those red wall seats for granted. Um, so, yeah, those are my questions. There is a lot of things to consider, and it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Yesterday I would have said it would be Sunak versus Mordaunt, but that gap really has narrowed. And I honestly think right now it's way for thin between Mordaunt and Truss. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's been an interesting race, actually, more interesting than some previous Tory contests. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Um, those are the main questions I would say for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.